My name is Mark Lawrence, and I'm a professor at Mississippi State University, and I'm director of the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Fish, which is funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development. Mississippi is the largest aquaculture producing state in the United States. And Mississippi State University, as Marcella so eloquently described, is a very proud partner of FAO in its fish health and aquaculture biosecurity programs. It's been my pleasure to work with MELBA since 2010, and it's been a real honor to work with FAO in implementation of these programs. My expertise is in veterinary microbiology, especially bacterial diseases of fish. And today I'm talking about an issue that is affecting aquaculture globally, antimicrobial resistance. Before I talk about aquaculture, I just wanted to make sure we have an understanding of what antimicrobial resistance is. Unlike the name applies, it does not mean that an antimicrobial resistant strain or an antimicrobial does not kill the bacterial strain at all. What it does mean is that the bacterial strain is not completely killed by the maximum achievable concentration of antimicrobials in the tissues. So it is based on the effectiveness of an antimicrobial in the actual tissues. Antimicrobial use can arise from overuse of antimicrobials, which is the common cause. So overuse of antimicrobials can promote development of resistance due to prolonged antimicrobial exposure, which then enriches the population of resistant bacteria by killing off the sensitive bacteria. So genetically, we all know that antimicrobial resistance can arise from random mutations in bacteria. But even more concerning is that antimicrobial resistance can be transmitted from one bacterial strain to another, usually by plasmids. Another big problem with plasmids is that a plasmid can carry more than one gene for resistance, so it can transmit resistance to more than one antimicrobial. So the big problem for antimicrobial resistance in aquaculture, as we're all aware, is that it can cause therapeutic failure. In other words, when a drug is used to treat a bacterial infection, it doesn't work. But it's not the only potential outcome that can arise from resistance. Sometimes the therapeutic response is just slower than expected. So instead of a 2 to 3 day recovery from the onset of antimicrobial therapy, it may require a week to recover from the infection. Or another potential outcome is that it may appear that therapy is successful, but then after resolution, the disease then reoccurs. However, antimicrobial use is an important option for producers to have in aquaculture, just as in other animal production systems. First reason is because it prevents animal suffering. So it prevents suffering of infected fish. So it is a welfare issue. It is also important for the resilience of producers by preventing economic losses. So it is a livelihood issue as well. But another potential concern is the risk to and the big question here is, can antimicrobial resistance be transmitted from bacteria in fish to human pathogens in the fish value chain, which would then lead to consumption of antimicrobial resistant pathogens from fish? This is a big concern. And there is more research that is needed in this area. So far, at least to my knowledge, these links are not experimentally confirmed, but there is still concern about this potential, whether there is a link between antimicrobial use in aquaculture and antimicrobial resistance in pathogens that would affect people. More research is needed in this area, but one thing we are in general agreement on is that antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance is a true One Health issue, meaning it affects people's health, animal health, fish health, and the environment. But the good news is that antimicrobial resistance can be detected by diagnostic testing at the onset of therapy. In other words, antimicrobial resistance doesn't generally arise during the context of an infection. Usually, and in almost all cases, the pathogen is generally resistant or susceptible at the onset of therapy. So by conducting our antimicrobial susceptibility testing, when we initiate therapy, we can predict in almost all cases whether the therapy will work. Another good factor we have working in our favor is that responsible use of antimicrobials under the supervision of a licensed professional can prevent and reduce antimicrobial overuse. And of course, by preventing antimicrobial overuse, we can reduce and prevent antimicrobial resistance prevalence from increasing. Therefore, increasing the capacity for fish health internationally is a key strategy for preventing antimicrobial overuse and also for preventing antimicrobial resistance. In other words, development of the expertise to diagnose bacterial diseases and prescribe antimicrobials for use in aquaculture can protect the industry and human consumers from antimicrobial resistance. So, there are several keys to managing and preventing antimicrobial resistance in aquaculture. The biggest risk posed by antimicrobial use in aquaculture is misuse or overuse, which is commonly caused when antimicrobials are not properly regulated, which would then lead to overuse. Antimicrobial use in aquaculture must be under the supervision of qualified fish health experts. But the other key to managing and preventing antimicrobial resistance in aquaculture is that prevention is the key. Antimicrobials are never as effective as prevention of bacterial diseases in the first place. Nothing replaces good husbandry and management of health of fish. Antimicrobials are only used as a last resort when prevention fails. So in the context of a producer, good management of the fish and husbandry is the key to preventing infections, and then antimicrobials are only used if those practices fail and antimicrobial use is needed. And that does occur sometimes when diseases spread throughout an industry. Bacterial diseases in aquaculture are also often secondary to a predisposing factor. So elimination of the predisposing factors that set up the infection can often cause resolution. Other good strategies for prevention of bacterial diseases that will be addressed by other speakers in this webinar include vaccines and microbial management, which includes the use of probiotics and prebiotics. So, lastly, I just want to briefly introduce how antimicrobial use is regulated in the U.S. And in the U.S., it is regulated through the Veterinary Feed Directive Rule, or the VFD. The first element of the VFD rule is that antimicrobial medicated feed must be prescribed by a licensed veterinarian. That veterinarian must examine the fish, diagnose a bacterial disease, and then the veterinarian must maintain oversight of the feed use and then be available for follow-up questions if necessary. The client must use the antimicrobial medicated feed as prescribed by the veterinarian. So is antimicrobial resistance in aquaculture a problem in the U.S.? So what I'm showing here is actual data from the Aquatic Research and Diagnostic Laboratory at Mississippi State University in Stoneville, Mississippi. So monitoring for antimicrobial resistance is another key element besides regulating its use. And at Mississippi State University, we monitor for increasing incidence of antimicrobial resistance in the aquaculture industry. Every case that is submitted to our diagnostic lab is cultured for bacteria. And when bacteria are isolated, sensitivity profiling is always conducted. So the results I'm showing here are from over 700 cases that were submitted to the Aquatic Research and Diagnostic Laboratory in 2019. And as you can see, there were over 300 cases of Flavobacterium columnare isolated, over 200 cases of Edwardsiella ictaluri, 80 cases of Edwardsiella piscicida, and 12 cases of Aeromonas hydrophila. 3 microbials are approved for use in catfish aquaculture in the U.S., and those are oxytetracycline, which is labeled as terramycin, fluorphenicol, labeled as aquaflor in this graph, and sulfadimethoxine or metaprim, which is labeled as romet in this graph. So as you can see from our results, from all of our cases in 2019, antimicrobial resistance is not a problem in Flavobacterium columnare, which is a trend that we have seen over the last decade in our industry. Incidence of resistance to a single antimicrobial is low. The species we are most concerned about are the Edwardsiella species. So in Edwardsiella and Ictaluri and Edwardsiella piscicida are the species where we see the most resistance. And the problem that we are monitoring is that resistance or intermediate resistance to terramycin and aquaflor tends to occur together. So we see resistance of both of those, resistance to both those antimicrobials together more than we see them individually, which could suggest that this antimicrobial resistance is being maintained by a plasma. Fortunately, incidence of resistance to all three antimicrobials is low in our industry. So what I'm showing here is our results from 2019, and what I don't show is our trends over the last several years, but our incidence of resistance to these antimicrobials over the last 5 to 10 years has remained relatively constant. And so, but the key is that we are monitoring for resistance in the industry, and we're watching for trends. Besides watching the industry as a whole in a graph like this, Mississippi State University is also working at the farm level. So we're working with individual farms, and we're watching for trends for antimicrobial resistance at the farm level as well, so that we can work with the individual producer as necessary. So that's all I wanted to talk about for antimicrobial resistance. So with antimicrobial resistance, it is a concern, and it is a potential concern for not only the effectiveness of our ability to treat antimicrobial bacterial infections in fish, but it's also a very important potential for preventing risk of antimicrobial resistance transmission into the human food chain. Management of antimicrobial resistance the key is by prevention, but besides prevention, regulated use through fish health professionals is a key, and monitoring for incidents in the industry and at the farm level is also very important. The last thing before I wrap up, I just wanted to mention the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Fish, which I direct and is managed at Mississippi State University. This is a 5-year program that started in 2018 and funds projects in 5 countries: Nigeria, Kenya, Bangladesh, and Cambodia. The projects are aimed at improving production and harvesting of fish for improved nutrition and livelihoods. We are at the phase in our program now where new projects are starting, one of which will address aquaculture biosecurity and fish health capacity in Nigeria. For more information on our program, you can visit our web address, which is shown here. And before I wrap up, I just wanted to mention one of these new 13 projects, which I just described, which will support development of integrated rice-fish aquaculture systems in Nigeria for resilient livelihoods. And the reason I wanted to point out this project in particular is that this project illustrates a new type of partnership between USAID, Mississippi State University, and the FAO. And so this is the type of relationship that Mississippi State University, Feed the Future, and USAID are working on building to build our collaborations and complement each other in implementation of our programs. And I'm proud to say that the lead PI for this program is Matthias Halbert, who will be our next speaker this morning. And so I very much look forward to working with Matthias in implementation of this program over the next 3 years. So this project is a collaboration of scientists at FAO, University of Georgia, and the University of Ibadan. And with that, that will end my presentation. And again, I wanted to thank the FAO for this amazing opportunity to present in this webinar.